Thank you. So started recording. Right. Welcome everyone for another BAE book club session. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Hunsley and Debra Paul this evening, and the co-authors of Business Architecture, a Comprehensive Guide. And today's session is the first session of a 4-part series. So before we jump into introducing our guests, just a quick introduction to IIBA UK and what we do. So for those who like numbers, so IIBA UK is the UK arm of the IIBA Global, so International Institutes of Business Analysts. And some numbers sort of help you get acquainted. We have members affiliated with the UK chapter. We have 1,400 and counting members affiliated with our chapters, and 40% of whom are corporate members from 25 organizations. And in terms of our geographical spread in the UK, we have 5 main branches. So we've got the North Scotland, Southwest in Wales, Midlands and London. And we are entirely run by volunteers. So we have, give or take, 50 active volunteers at the moment to make all of this happen. And I'll probably say we're quite active in the BA community over here. We have virtual offerings such as this one with the book club. We also have brown bags mentoring schemes and other webinars. We have community in-person events such as socials and maybe some sessions purely for volunteers. And we're also affiliated with some conferences. So we have several now. We co-founded the IRM Business Analysis Conference Europe, and recently we have the BA Life that associates off. And most recently, we've partnered up with the BA Excellence Conference. That's in our events calendar. We can get more information, but that's coming up on 22nd of May. We also have a corporate membership for for multinationals, for companies. If you want to raise profile of your organization and your BA practice, that is administered by IIBA Global. So please check out their website for more information. And if you're interested in joining the IIBA as a member, there are a wealth of benefits, and these are just some of them in a nutshell. A wealth of BA resources, the digital library of numerous ebooks. There are materials to help you with your BA practices. You've got an active knowledge hub that's still being added to, and webinar archives stretching many years and has a wealth of information in it. We have discounts that are exclusive to members. And of course, it opens up even more doors for a global IIBA community. And if you're interested in what we're up to at the chapter level, we are active on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, and most recently, YouTube, where we'll be posting some more content shortly. And I also like to call out some volunteering opportunities that's available at the chapter. If you'd like to make an impact or like to know more about how to get involved with the BA community, whether it's giving back or you like to learn a bit in your BA community, in your BA journey, feel free to get in touch. We actually do have a session coming up on the 3rd of June at the evening to basically illustrates how we operate behind the scenes, get to put names to faces to our volunteers and our wonderful people who makes it happen. If some insights that might help make your mind on whether or not the volunteering's for you, there's a link to register on our website, or you can email me on president@uk.iib.org if you have any questions or would like a chat. And coming to the book club. Welcome to the book club community. So today is our first session, and today we'll be sort of focusing on an introduction to business architecture. So that's today's virtual session. It'll be followed by 2 more virtual sessions. That's on the IIBA UK calendar, events calendar, and you feel free to register for that. And the 4th and final session in this business architecture series will be in person in London. And so it will be a good opportunity for you to meet the authors. So the event will be going live soon. So keep a watch out on our events page. And just a bit of housekeeping for today's session. We have a Q&A Zoom feature if you want to post any questions or comments to the authors or ourselves, and we'll try to cover off as many of these questions as possible during this session. But if not, then we'll mop it up maybe through social media. And now, I want to introduce ourselves and the co-authors of the book. So I guess I'll start. I'm Christina Tan. I'm the president of IIBA UK chapter. Adriana, a few words from you.
Hi, I'm Adriana Silva. I'm the community director for London and the Southeast with IIBA UK. And I have the joy of being here tonight.
Great, thank you. Yeah, over to our co-authors and Jonathan.
I'm the Service Development Director for Assist Knowledge Development, and some of you may have seen me as a host or a guest on the BA Brew podcast as well. So hello everyone.
And I'm Debbie Paul, sometimes known as Debra Paul. I don't mind which. I'm the CEO of Assist and work very closely with Jonathan in lots of the areas that I think are relevant to what we're going to talk about this evening.
All right, thank you so much. And been having some conversations for a while on this and on this upcoming book. And so yeah, Adriana, I think yeah, maybe an introduction on sort of how the book started and sort of what motivated you to sort of come up with the concept of writing this book. I know, for example, Debbie, you've been sort of played a huge part and written a business analysis book on BCS publishing. So what was the motivating factor behind business architecture?
Okay, well, shall I go first then, Jonathan? Is that okay? I think it's in one way it's the same motivation as for any book, really. You see a subject and you think, okay, let's see what's out there that I can look at. And if it's a subject that you then find yourself applying, and you do research, you do reading, and you see information in a number of places, but there was nothing really that pulled it together, then I always start to think, would it be interesting to actually put a book together that pulls some of this into one place and makes it useful for practitioners? Because although I have, done academic study, I'm really a practitioner person at heart, and I always like to think about how we can apply things. So part of the motivation for me for this book was I felt that there was a lot of detail available, but I didn't really feel that it was as pragmatic as I would like. And I'm not somebody who does detail in terms of models or frameworks unless I think it's relevant. Okay, so I wanted something that I thought was relevant, and Jonathan and I just talk about it so often, this subject, and have done for so many years, that it seemed obvious that we should start to put some of our experiences and our sort of practical insights into a book. And it just felt like business architecture needed that. So that was my motivation. Jonathan, you add to that.
So yeah, motivation to write a book. I like spending time on my laptop is my short answer. I'm joking. No, I guess to write a book, you've got to be really passionate about the subject. And Debbie's not fibbing. We talk about this all the time, and service design and business analysis. We can't get through a normal conversation. We have to divert to one of those subjects somehow, and we just do. So I think passion for the subject, the discipline, is one of the key motivations, but also wanting to extend the discussion and further knowledge in this for practitioners. And one of the things that Debbie and I talked about a lot, and with the other co-authors, was trying to put an outcome focus. So one of the gaps, as I see it, in the practice of business architecture, and it is varied, but some business architects sometimes lose sight of outcomes for the organization and for customers. And what we wanted to do was firmly put business architecture as an outcome focused discipline that really helps organizations move forward in alignment with whatever the organization is trying to achieve, but also the stakeholders of the organization, particularly its customers or its users or service users, whatever language you want to use. And so that was one of the core motivations as well for writing the book.
And for example, thinking about it, we mentioned that you wrote it for the practitioners. Who are these practitioners you had in mind while writing the book? Who do you aim? You hope to aim the book at, if there is a specific group you have been targeting, let's put it this way.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take that, Debbie, or should I take that on?
I'll start it and then you can finish it, Jonathan, because that's how we sort of roll, isn't it, most of the time? I think from my perspective, when I first started looking at business architecture, which was quite a few years ago now, I went to a conference, and it was one of the early Business Architecture Guild conferences. It was in Germany. And I went with an ex-colleague, but current friend of ours called Paul Turner. And he'd been very interested in the subject as well. And we went to the conference, and there was quite a diverse group of people there. But some of them had come from a sort of enterprise architecture background. Some were more sort of business analysis, some were more general change. And sort of looking at the people there and then thinking about business architecture, it seemed to me that if you work in anything to do with business or business change, then actually you should understand it. So that makes the audience incredibly broad, I appreciate. But, you know, when Jonathan says passion, I really do think this is such an important subject. And a lot of people who know me know that I would say the same about business analysis. And where I come from is we need to understand all of these things, because actually, if we're really going to make change work and get to those outcomes, and you do find that sometimes in organizations, you can disappear into a silo of a particular role without understanding how that's going to cut across the organization and get to the target audience. I think where that happens, that's not really what the organization should be striving to do. And I think in the business change and digital world, we really should be trying to make things a bit better than that. So the audience is very broad, because I like to think anybody working in that environment can gain something from the book. And I had all of that in mind when I was writing my sections. Mm-hmm. Jonathan.
Yeah, so how do I follow that? So broad, absolutely. And we firmly believe in this kind of idea of you offer value. And so the readers of the book, we hope, find value in the content, but I want it to be a book that's used by people. I think the primary kind of persona of a customer, if I use those words, might be business architects. So someone who wants to learn more about their role, the professional discipline of business architecture, a practicing business architect. I think this book is, through the service framework that we've put in, that some of you would have seen, and that's the focus of the second webinar. But the service framework, I think, is going to be of immense use for people that are leading and managing business architecture and enterprise architecture functions. That's the intent anyway. Service designers, anyone involved in change, portfolio managers, and program managers, all of the roles that I can't mention all of them because there's so many, but there's a big group of people. I really want to pick this book up, and I don't know if they will, but I think business owners and business leaders should be picking up and reading this book, because it's the offer in the book is that it helps you with the alignment of your execution activities to your strategy through business architecture. And that, for me, as an audience group, I really want them to pick up this book, because I think that the more individuals working in the change profession driving outcomes for customers and the organization, the better. And for me, business leaders should pick up this book. I don't know if they will. I haven't had feedback on that. But one of the other dimensions that Debbie and I have is we're both directors of a business. We use this in our jobs. And so we as business leaders use this, and we find it practical and useful. And we're hoping that other business leaders also find it practical and useful for them.
Well, that sounds absolutely great to see. And I personally, I found that the book very accessible to read, being very honest, the first book in business architecture that I have read. So it was very much approachable. This is me being curious on the process of writing the book. You are both experienced writers and authors, but for example, how long did it take for you from the initial inspiration to the completion? How long did it take for you to write this book? How was the journey? As briefly as you can. You would like to talk?
I don't like to talk about it, Adriana. It's
Oh.
the memory of writing. I don't like talking about it, so I think Debbie should answer this.
The thing is, when you write a book, that there is quite a lengthy process, and I think sometimes people don't realise that even when you've submitted the manuscript, there's another lengthy process coming your way. In total, from inspiration about writing it to actually publication in February, I would say about 18 months. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Jonathan, but that is my recollection.
Yeah.
And what we did, because obviously the first stage is to find a publisher. And the obvious publisher for us was BCS, because we had worked with BCS before. We knew their processes, and we knew the people, and we knew that we could work very successfully with them. And the first stage is to put a proposal in and have that proposal reviewed, possibly updated and reworked, and then hopefully accepted. That can take months, just that part. That, I think on this one it didn't take too long, but I think it was 2 to 3 months. So you've got that period. And in the middle of that, you're thinking, okay, we've got to start writing at some point, and we need to put a schedule together. And in the proposal, you set out your proposed chapters, and then you start putting a schedule together. And one of the things Jonathan and I really wanted to do on this book was work with other people who were experienced in the field. And we were very fortunate that we knew Vicky Rothwell, Victoria Banner, and Michael Greenhalgh, and that they all said yes, which was lovely. And then we set out a schedule, and Jonathan's very good at putting a plan with dates, and I'm very good at keeping to time scale, and he's very good at working to deadlines. And between us, that works. And the way BCS wanted us to work was to actually submit chapters as they were finished, which is quite a difficult thing when you're writing an entire book, because it is a little bit iterative and the book does tend to evolve. So we did it in sort of 3-chapter chunks, as it were, instead. And then gradually you start to see it working. But for anybody who's interested in writing a book, Jonathan and I spent every weekend, Jonathan, virtually.
And that's why I don't like talking about it, Adriana, because we lost every weekend until 2024 on this book. So, and it's, I hope, a worthwhile contribution. But and I know that Vicky, Victoria, and Michael also put an immense amount of time into this. And then we've also got case study contributors that put content in, and a whole bunch of reviewers behind the scenes that were also reviewing, and it's a massive team effort to get the book published. And there's another bit of this that isn't visible, but the entirety of Debbie and I's careers, almost thinking about these subjects, is also part of the preparation of writing these books. So I could say, well, I spent 20 years thinking about business architecture or longer, and that's part of the prep in order to write the book. It's not the direct work of obviously putting pen to paper or typing up the content, but lots and lots of work has gone into this. And one of the things we did in the book, obviously through publishing the business architecture service framework, is that builds on Debbie's doctorate. And Debbie, was that 4 years or so for your doctorate?
Yeah, 4.5. Yeah.
And so just a huge amount of work that doesn't appear to you, the reader, or the someone on this webinar. You don't see all of that work that goes underneath it, all that research and effort.
Yes. It's
Okay.
also great fun that once you submit the manuscript, you then receive all the copy editor queries, which is extensive. And then when you've answered all of those, then you get the typeset of proofs, and they're PDFs, and you have to review every single word. So it's fun. But if anybody's interested in doing it, I really would be happy to talk to anybody, because it is, yeah, it's an intensive process, but I do quite enjoy it as well. I have to admit, maybe I'm a bit odd, but I do enjoy it.
And there were moments as we were writing it. I remember, I think it was the motivation chapter, and it was odd, Adriana. The chapters weren't written in the order in which they appear in the book. So with the sections of 3 chapters might have been chapters 1, 4, and 7, for example. So they weren't written in the order that they presented in the book. But there's one chapter, and it's particularly the motivation chapter. But I remember I'd written 2 chapters already, and I was starting the motivation chapter, and I hit a brick wall. I had writer's block, Adriana, and we had a planned structure. We knew what we wanted to say in that section, and I wanted to craft it, and I wanted it to be as good as possible. But I do remember, I think it might have been a Sunday afternoon, ringing Debbie and saying, "Debbie, I've got 50 words, and I need 6,000 or so. I'm stuck." And talked it through, and and there were also conversations with Vicky and Vic and Michael, where we helped each other through, and it, yeah, real team effort.
Well, you both can be sure that we do appreciate your effort and the contributions you bring, and we are very fortunate to be able to draw on all your professional experience and everything, and all that you bring into this book. I pass it back to Christina now for the next question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a digital copy of the book, and the thing that strikes me sort of most is just how accessible this topic, really is to anyone reading this. It could be a business leader, which I do firmly believe personally that it should have an awareness of business architecture, to people who are business architects by job title, who actually needs to know every nook and cranny. And I suppose starting from the people who might not have that, that initial inclination to pick this book up straight away just because their job titles, aren't architects of any sort. How would you introduce the topic of business architecture to people who are considered fresh to the topic? And I guess I'll start with Debbie.
Oh, for a second then I thought Jonathan was going to speak. I thought, yes, good.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'll let him in a second.
Thanks, Debbie.
It's quite interesting, really, because the aspect and the perspective we took very early on with this book was to look at it through a service lens. And I think that gives it accessibility that other books on business architecture may not have sometimes, because the service perspective, it's all about every organization in the world exists to deliver something, okay? And customers engage with those organizations to benefit from doing so. Otherwise, why would they? There has to be an underlying rationale, a why, if you like. The service perspective puts business architecture firmly at the heart of organizations offering something to customers delivering something that achieves outcomes, and understanding that the customers have to work with them. When you start with that, and Jonathan and I are always quoting Simon Sinek's Start With Why. We are very boring on that subject. But once you start there with that why and understanding that, then understanding the service perspective and how business architecture really fits with that, it just makes it click, I think, for people, because they then can say, that's why I'm doing that. That's why I need to understand that. I don't know what you think about that, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, you know, I love Start With Why, and I think how I answer this question of how would I introduce someone to the subject of business architecture really depends on who it is and kind of what mood I'm in and how creative I want to be with my answer. But I remember taking my first job as a business architect, and my dad was asking me what my job was. What's this new job you've got? And the way I explained it to him was the organization I worked for had the equivalent of 7 different boiler systems to control the heating. And I remember that conversation. I was walking around a local country park with my dad on a weekend. And if you read the first chapter of the book, there's loads of things about heating systems. And I talk about heating provision, and then you can see I talk about different hows in terms of where you could have underfloor heating or a gas-fired boiler or a fireplace with an open wood fire. And these are really quite weird analogies that I use, but it's kind of think about what you're doing and how you do it is a really fundamental building block for understanding, well, what's this discipline of business architecture? And I sometimes use other analogies like a boat with 6 steering wheels. It just doesn't make sense. You wouldn't have a boat with 6 steering wheels. And business architecture gives you a lens to analyze the logic of the organization. Does it make sense to deliver the outcomes that aligned with the why? We can obviously quote the definitions that we put in the book, and I'm happy to share those as well. But I think if you're trying to explain what is business architecture, you think, well, who's the person I'm talking to, and what would make sense to them, and how do you put it across to them?
Yes, absolutely. How to put it across to them in a way that resonates with them, whether it's a boiler, a house, or a boat. So I think we're starting to get some questions in actually. And there's one from an anonymous attendee who writes, I wonder if there are real life cases in the book. And do you think it's just an urban legend that organizations like very stubborn with regards to saying no to any changes, business architects in charge?
Okay, well, there are case studies in the book, and we're very grateful to our case study contributors because they contributed some real world applications that really are quite interesting to read, and they give you that sort of real world perspective. I think a lot of business architects, I mean, we worked with Victoria, Vicky and Michael on the book, and we shared our experiences. And obviously, Jonathan and I don't have that job title, but we use this every day, because we're sort of responsible for a lot of this stuff at Assist. I think that it's not that, I don't know about them being stubborn. I've not come across that. What I come across are people who are actually really engaged in wanting to make a difference. Because to me, that's what business architecture is about. In fact, you can look at any of the architectural domains and how they all fit together. They're all about making that difference, achieving the outcomes that the organization wants. So I would view it as an urban legend because I don't meet people like that. I meet people in the change world who really want to make that difference and sometimes encounter lots of difficulties and problems within their organization, some of which are due to external pressures, and budgetary pressures and those types of things. But, people who work in our areas tend to be people who do want to achieve something for their organizations and try their best to do so. That's my take. I don't know about you, Jonathan.
I'd agree. Business architects I speak to, they tend to be quite seasoned change professionals. They don't start in business architecture. Often they move from other roles like business analysis or enterprise architecture, just as two examples. But they've been in and around change for a while, and they want to focus in on business architecture because they want to drive those organizational outcomes. They want to make a difference. And so I see, when I meet business architects, collaborative folk that want to help. And they're very similar, I'd say, to business analysts. They're collaborative people that also want to help. And there is an urban myth that I will mention, though, and I do think this one does exist in reality in some organizations, the ivory tower. So in some organizations, the business architects or even the enterprise architects are seen as being too removed or too remote from the change teams doing the change execution work. And I think there's a cause and effect here. Sometimes they're too thinly spread. There's 100 change folk and there's 2 business architects. Well, they're very thinly spread. They can't go out and talk to all of them. But I do think there are some urban myths around this discipline, and that's one I've come across, and I've experienced to a greater, lesser degree, depending on the ratio between the business architects and the other change professionals.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And speaking of any sort of real life cases, are there any that you'd like to bring up during the session? Might be a good opportunity to segue into that.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Jonathan, or do you want? Yeah,
I
you
talk
go.
about my first. I'll talk about that very first business architecture role that I had then. So I was a business analyst and I was looking for a new opportunity. I was quite keen and ambitious, and I wanted a new problem to solve. And so I was offered, I think, about 7 different roles in my organization, and I chose the hardest one. And the one that I chose was application rationalization for the CIO. It'd been tried by 3 different groups of individuals previous to me looking at it, including 2 external consultancies and the former head of the enterprise architecture function. And it was something CIO wanted to move forward, but hadn't got moved forward. And I put my hand up to say, yeah, I'll do that. So I became, for a financial services organization, their very first business architect, moved into the enterprise architecture team. And I had this challenge: can you reduce the software applications? And I didn't know where to start, in all honesty. And so I did some reading. I looked at my business analysis toolkit, and I looked at things like Zachman and TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, and looked at what was going on in the enterprise architecture team and what were the folk doing. So I was really trying to find my way around. And then someone asked to install a new software application. And I was only 2 weeks into the role, and I was trying to work out, well, how do I shape and form this? And the new software application that they wanted to install was for a really small service, which was for the validation of addresses. When you put in your postcode into a website, you get a pre-formatted, validated set of addresses. And I was quite fortunate. There was also a huge infrastructure program going on, and there was a guy who worked in the infrastructure team, and I had to bribe him with a bit of coffee and cake. But he would tell me exactly how many pieces of software were already in existence in the organization supporting this really basic function of address validation. And I found that there were 15 or 16 different variations of the same software doing exactly the same thing. Jonathan, can we install number 17? You're the application rationalization program manager at that point. Well, there was no mechanism to say no. There was no governance. There was also no mechanism to rationalize these applications. They didn't have a baseline view of what were their applications. So obviously I was working on all of that. And then what I did was I trialed a condensed version of the TOGAF architecture development method, which I'd aligned with a consultancy framework. And it was basically looking at the business case for rationalizing these address validation pieces of software. It took quite a while because in the organization there was a little bit of I'd say they were risk averse. They didn't want to adopt change quickly without really considering what would be the impact of change. But once I put together the business case, I asked for something like £200,000, and I gave back the CIO roughly £2 to £2.2 million over the next 5 years on that very first thing that I looked at. I then looked at quite a few other application rationalization opportunities, including basic services like credit card validation, bank account validation, check printing was a thing back then, so that's showing my age. Policy administration and claims administration were all part of the mix as well. But I managed to find a business case for tidying up the logic of the organization. I was using value chain, which is a technique that's covered in the book. And I was also using conceptual, I would call them business use cases. You could call them conceptual business activities. I could argue it would be capabilities, but I was using this abstract layer to link and think through what have we got and how do we do it. Hence my analogy of a boat with 7 steering wheels, because that's what I was finding in my organization at the time. Does that make sense? That weird story about address validation software, which sounds like nonsensical, but it was the start of how I then really got quite excited about business architecture and the business outcomes it could drive.
Yeah, thought that was quite an interesting story, actually. Yeah, thank you very much. We have a question that has been posted, a few minutes ago on the chat. So I'll just read this out. Some of the key business architecture concepts are often seen as somewhat abstract, e.g. capabilities, and feed into the ivory tower view. How do you get across the key benefits to executives whose eyes may glaze over when faced with such abstract concepts?
This is a really interesting one, because if I have a phrase that I use all the time, is how do we leverage the capability, which sounds incredibly abstract and conceptual, and actually it's incredibly practical and important. So I come from a business analysis background for many years. I work in an organization where the concept of service is absolutely key and has been for over 30 years. And I was introduced to the concepts of business architecture over a decade ago. And to my way of thinking, if you understand what they're trying to achieve, then you can explain them a bit better, particularly if you can put them in a context. So the way I always look at it is this. I come back to why. Okay, so what is it this organization offers? And you can ask that to anybody. Your organization, what is it you are offering, the world or your customers or whoever they are? You can also ask it internally. You can say to an internal group, what is it you offer the organization? Okay, and that's where you sort of start, because that is your service offering. Now, sometimes you will then have somebody saying, well, we deliver value in this area. And Jonathan knows, and Jonathan is exactly the same, because that's the moment when we go, no, that you cannot say you're delivering value. You're delivering something. You're delivering some sort of service, some sort of product within that service. But what is it? And the key question is, what do you want your customers to get out of it? What do you want them to feel when they engage with you? What benefits do you want them to think they've had? Once you understand that, I use value streams or value chains, as Jonathan does. And this is where you start tipping into a bit of business analysis here, of course, because you're at that high level of, okay, these activities need to come together to make sure this is delivered successfully. Because if they don't, then actually we can't deliver it successfully. So, and everybody loves anything to do with activity or process, particularly if it's in a sequence. So that's relatively straightforward to explain. But of course, the next level then is each of those areas of activity has got to have something from the organization to be able to work effectively. And that's where we come to capability. And I think sometimes the problem with the word capability is it can sound very abstract. But then when you look at what that actually means, and it's not just having people with skill, because people confuse it with competence, and it's different. Competence is part of it. You need people with skill. But if you're really going to be able to carry out those activities, you actually start moving into areas like technical infrastructure, because these days, most of the activities require some sort of technology support or enablement. So you start thinking, okay, well, this capability happens because we've got some people who know what they're doing with skill. They've got the right tools to do the job. Have they got the right information to do the job? We need to find out about that. Are they authorized to be able to use all of that to do the job? Is there somebody taking ownership who will allow it to happen? And all of this is making up that capability. And what I always say to people is, if you start by understanding what is it we're trying to offer customers, okay, so what are the activities we've got to carry out successfully to get there? Right, what is it we now need to make those activities work effectively? And of course, at a certain point, you'll go, do you know, we haven't really got the processes, or we haven't really got the technology quite right in that area. And that's the point where I say, well, you probably need a business analyst to come and get the puppet model and actually look at all of it to make that capability work. So that's how I talk about it, because you have to come back to, why does your organization exist? Who are the customers and what are you trying to do for them? Because the architecture enables you to do that. And capability is abstract until you start really looking at an actual value stream and saying, right, what is it you need to leverage to make that happen? So that's where I go.
Brilliant, right, thank you. And we're starting to get sort of more questions, and I'm just trying to kind of group together some themes. I think there's some generic interest around sort of business architecture and how that's kind of different from enterprise architecture. I think we might be kind of going slightly into that. So the different sort of the 6 enterprise architecture domains. So perhaps we can cover that off and move over to this particular segment.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to attempt screen share then, and I'll try and bring a little bit of this to life if that helps, Christina. So if we look at the domains of enterprise architecture, business architecture is a core domain of enterprise architecture. So a bit like the Poppet model, for those that are familiar with the Poppet model. Am I presenting my screen? Can you see the domains?
Yep.
And it's on full
Yeah.
screen. Right, good. Getting used to Zoom. So business architecture core domain, but we've got these links through to the applications and data architecture. So your business capabilities are supported quite often by software applications. An application could, in theory, maybe be a paper-based form as well, because that paper-based form can contain data. It's not always universally agreed on, but if you've got a website supporting the sale of a pair of shoes on it for a retailer, then that website would be a software application. That website has data, the size of the shoes, the style and whatnot, and who's it being sold to. There's loads of data architecture elements, and then there's infrastructure. And some people like to draw a line between infrastructure and business architecture. We don't. We choose not to, because they're drawing that line because they think cloud services mean that there should be a direct link. I think we need to think about the design of our architecture really quite carefully. And this model is a mental framework to get your head around all of the domains. And then the 2 domains, which I think we wouldn't have been discussing maybe 15, 20 years ago as much as we are now, but you can see them on the side: compliance architecture and security architecture. Now, these 2 domains, they're covered in all of those other 4 core domains that you can see in the middle. So for security architecture, you've got to look at your business architecture, particularly I'd say your business processes. You're looking at protecting the assets of the organization. And then your applications and data and infrastructure architecture, obviously additional layers that are in support of your security architecture. And you can again take the compliance lens and think, well, what are the business capabilities, the business processes or value streams? and then the applications data and infrastructure architecture that are in support of those capabilities and or value streams. So these are the domains of enterprise architecture. And in my worldview, the business architect and a business analyst and anyone working in change should really understand these domains. If I just quickly move forward, we've also got to understand where are we today, the current state, what is the target state that we're aiming for? So one of the questions, I think it was Colin, was talking about capabilities and how do you bring this to life for a senior exec? Well, these are some really important questions for a senior exec. Where are we now? Where do you want to get to? And how do you move between your current and or target states? Because that's where strategy execution really comes in. And then my final slide in this section, just to bring it back to the domains. This is a mental model, and you can draw this with your stakeholders in a workshop, but you can represent your current state via the domains of enterprise architecture, and you can represent the target state with those domains. It gives you a basis for gap analysis to identify options for moving from where you are to where you want to get to. And you can use this on any of this paradigm of current to target state. You can use on any of the models that we've mentioned in the business architecture toolkit. Does that help answer that question on domains of enterprise architecture, Christina and Adriana?
Yes, yes.
I believe it does. Yeah.
Right, I will stop sharing there. Those slides that we've presented, I believe we're going to share with IIBA UK, and we're happy for those to be distributed to anyone that's attending the webinar.
Right, thank you. And over to Adriana for this segment.
Ah, yes. Wow. I didn't realize that we are coming to the. Ah, no, sorry. We still have a session of the 6 enterprise domains, isn't it? So I think we are just running a bit late for our time. So let me not waste it. What we could expand now is on the how. Would you like to continue with the questions, Christina? Sorry, I think I got a bit distracted with the questions popping in. Should we respond a couple of them? What do you think?
Yes, that would be good. Thank you. So there's this one from Peter Thompson. How would you differentiate between business architecture and business service design?
Yes, that would be a good differentiation after working on the difference between business architecture and enterprise architecture. So how we differentiate business architecture from business service design?
Oh,
Is that our colleague Pete Thompson?
That's what I was thinking. That's our colleague. Thank you, Pete. It's really interesting because the whole area of business service design, there's been a huge amount of research and thinking and analysis around that for many, many years now. And it looks at, I think, quite an architectural view in some ways, because it looks at organizations through a service lens, but it starts, if you like, at its most abstract by thinking about the ecosystem for the organization. And the ecosystem is such an interesting viewpoint. And of course, part of what happens with these different ways of looking at things is that's really what they are. They're almost like taking different perspectives on the same thing. But the ecosystem perspective is quite fascinating because it's probably the most abstract, but it is also one where you can see a lot of practical application. For example, in an organization's ecosystem, you can model all the different external entities or external service systems, as we call them, that the organization is working with. So if you're working with a procured supplier for technology, for people, for, I don't know, financial control, governance, whatever it is, all of those organizations are part of the ecosystem. And the key thing for me about that view is that you have to understand the relationships. And this is where it actually becomes into things like the compliance and security architectures come into play. data architecture, because there may be transfer of data between these different entities within the ecosystem. And I think a business service design view starts by looking at ecosystem. And I think it is broader in some ways than looking at the business architecture view. But I do think there's a very strong link. And I also think that business architects would really benefit from understanding it. At a more detailed level, when you're looking at business services, you're back to what I was talking about before, which is this, what is it we're offering? And then you move into the, well, okay, how do we model that? Now, if you're looking at service design, this takes me into something that I also talk about a lot, which is leveraging capability, because this is where innovation comes in. So I think the business service design view looks at some of these abstract areas, but actually says, okay, you business architects have said we've got these capabilities. How can we use them? What can we do sometimes to pick and mix them? How can we work with the other entities in our ecosystem sometimes to ask them to do different things with their capability so that we can build new or enhanced services? And I think that's where the service design mindset comes in. Whereas the architecture mindset is more about, okay, if we have this service, these are the activities, this is how it has been developed and designed, these are the capabilities we need, rather than the what can we leverage here to do something new, different, and better? And to go back to Jonathan's slide that he showed, if you think about it, if we say current state, strategy, execution, target state, somewhere there's got to be something that says, well, actually, what do we need that target state for? You know, what is going to be the strategy around our services? What is going to be the design? How might they need to look differently given the drivers in the external world, technological change, whatever it might be? And that is really where I think a service design mindset comes in, because it's that innovative, creative view of the world. Whereas I think the business architect is more saying, well, okay, this is what this organization does and has. But the overlap, I think, is quite huge. And to me, if we're going to co-create value, which is one of my favorite phrases, we all have to collaborate. And we actually have to understand that sometimes we are overlapping. And one of the things that we did in the book, and Jonathan was very instrumental in this, was look at service frameworks for these roles. And if you look at them, you can see the overlaps quite clearly. I just saw Pete's quote. It's okay, Pete, we're seeing you on Tuesday.
Right. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you much.
Okay. Well, we have a few questions more, and we are just conscious that we won't have time to respond to them today. So what we are doing is to collate all the questions that came, and we are making sure that we cover them in the course in the upcoming sessions. For tonight, I think we made a great start in discussing the topic of the business architecture. We received quite a lot of questions from the people joining us. So thank you very much for sending the questions. So we took note of them. We will be, as I said, looking into them in the future sessions. We would like to invite everybody to join us again in the continuation of the series. And we are welcoming any questions. If you would like to contact us outside of the session, please please feel free to get in contact with us. You probably saw my email address in the invites and confirmations, communitylondon-e@uk.iiba.org. Feel free to get in touch at any point. And please join us next time. Debra and Jonathan, we are extremely grateful that you took the time to sit with us, to plan the series, and to share this amount of knowledge and experience you have with us. We are extremely grateful, and we would like to thank you on behalf of everyone attending for that. Christina, would you like to extend some words as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for this. I think there's been lots of interest within our BA community, whether it's at an elementary level, understanding business architecture a bit more, or they're thinking about potentially kind of progressing their careers in that direction. This book seems like a really great reference guide for this wide range of audiences. And thank you ever so much for spending your time with us today. And for those interested in finding out more about the book, where could we find it?
It's available on the BCS Bookshop and on Amazon. Those are probably the two most prominent sources. Yet to see one in a bookshop, an actual physical bookshop. But if anybody does see one, please let me know where, because I want to go and take a photograph. But BCS Bookshop and Amazon online, yeah.
Perfect. Right. Thank you ever so much. We're coming to the hour. So I have made note of outstanding questions, and we'll find a way of getting that answered. So thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, thank you, Jonathan and Debbie. And we'll speak at a future series session. And have a great evening, everyone.
And by the way, next session is on the 2nd of June, is that? So we aim to see everybody on the 5th of June.
Yeah.
On the 5th of June for the continuation of this very instigating conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.